So, hello students. So, today we will be looking into another module known as theories of emotion. In the last module, we have looked at what is emotion. So, in continuation of the emotion, we will be looking at theories of emotion. And what are these theories of emotion? James Lange theory, 𝗳𝗏𝗧 theory and 𝗧𝗏𝗧 theory. Coming to the objectives of this module, one is to understand the different theories in emotions, and the other one is to compare and contrast between James Lange theory, 𝗳𝗏𝗧 theory and 𝗧𝗏𝗧 theories of emotion. Now, we will look at the different theories in emotion. In psychology, emotion is often defined as a complex state of feeling that results in physical and physiological changes that influence thought and behavior. Emotionality is associated with a range of psychological phenomena including temperament, personality, mood and motivation. According to David G. Myers, human emotion involves physiological arousal, expressive behaviors and conscious experience. And the major theories of emotion can be grouped into three main categories, one being physiological, second being neurological and third being cognitive. Coming to physiological theories, they suggest that responses within the body are responsible for emotions. For example, a dog approaching a person, heart beats faster and he or she starts running. Second, neurological theories, and they propose that activity within the brain leads to emotional responses. For example, any change in amygdala can lead to fight or flight response. Third one is a cognitive theories which argue that thoughts and other mental activity play an essential role in forming emotions. For example, a lion approaching a person, though there is fear, the thought that it will harm me will make a person to run for his life. Now, moving on to the first theory of emotion, that is James Lange theory. It is a theory known as physiological theory, and why it is known as physiological theory, we will look into it. The theory James Lange theory was developed in the late 1800s by William James and Carl Lange, who separately published similar writings about the nature of emotion. According to James and Lange, emotions consist of the body's physical responses to something in the environment. When you witness something emotional, this leads to changes in the body. For example, your heart rate or blood pressure might increase, you might start sweating, or you might start breathing more quickly. James famously explained the theory in his book, The Principles of Psychology, where he writes that we feel sorry because we cry, angry because we strike, afraid because we tremble, and not that we cry, strike or tremble because we are sorry, angry or fearful, as the case may be. In other words, our emotional reactions consist of a physical responses to the potentially emotional events in the environment. James suggests that these physical reactions are key to our emotions and that without them our experiences would be pale, colorless and destitute of emotional warmth. And the James Lange theory of emotion asserts that emotions arise as a result of physiological arousal. That is, the self-perception of changes in the body produces an emotional response. And according to this theory, we experience emotions such as fear, sadness and happiness only after physiological arousal, such as fight or flight response has occurred. And this theory of emotion, for instance, asserts that emotions arise from physiological arousal, in a sense that the self-perception of changes in the body produce emotional experiences. And according to this theory, we laugh, which is a physiological response to a stimulus, and consequently we feel happy, which is an emotion, and we cry and consequently feel sad. For example, if you were to encounter a venomous snake in your backyard, how would your reaction be? Your sympathetic nervous system, responsible for activating your fight or flight response, would initiate physiological arousal, making your heart race and increasing your breathing rate. According to Lange theory of emotion, you would experience a feeling of fear only after this physiological arousal had taken place. Different arousal patterns would be associated with different feelings. One major limitation of James Lange theory is that it is not known exactly what causes the changes in the body, so it is unclear whether they should be considered part of the emotion itself. And critics of the James Lange theory doubted that there is sufficient variation in physiological arousal to lead to the whole wide variety of emotions that we experience. Now we move on to another theory in emotion known as Cannon-Bard theory of emotion. In the early 1900s, an influential yet controversial theory of emotions was the James Lange theory put forward by William James and Carl Lange. According to this theory, our emotions consist of physical changes in the body. Although this theory was incredibly influential, many researchers doubted some of the claims made by James and Lange. Among those who questioned the James Lange theory was Walter Cannon, a professor at Harvard. In 1927, Cannon published a landmark paper critiquing the James Lange theory and suggesting an alternate approach to understanding emotions. And according to Cannon, scientific evidence suggested that there were several problems with the James Lange theory. The James Lange theory would predict that each emotion involves a slightly different set of physiological responses. However, Cannon noted that different emotions like anger and fear can produce very similar physiological states, yet it is relatively easy for us to tell the differences between these emotions. Cannon noted that many factors affect our physiological states but don't produce an emotional response. However, these types of scenarios don't typically produce strong emotions. If our physiological systems can be activated without feeling an emotion, Cannon suggested then something else besides just physiological activation should occur when we feel an emotion. Our emotional responses can occur relatively rapidly, even within a second of perceiving something emotional. However, bodily changes typically occur much more slowly than this. Because bodily changes seem to occur more slowly than our emotions do, Cannon suggested that bodily changes couldn't be the source of our emotional experience. And this Cannon-Bard theory argues that physiological arousal and emotional experience occur simultaneously yet independently. According to this theory, when you see a venomous snake, you feel fear at exactly the same time that your autonomic nervous system responds. And according to this theory, emotional expression results from activation of the subcortical centers of the brain. And this theory of emotion was developed by researchers who criticized the James Lange theory for its limited ability to account for the wide variety of emotions experienced by human beings. While ��·Lange theory proposed that emotions arise from physiological arousal, ��𝗏𝗏 theory of emotion stated that physiological arousal and emotional experience occur simultaneously yet independently. And this theory posits that when you see a venomous snake in your backyard, you feel fear at exactly the same time that your body initiates its physiological fight or flight response. Even though they occur at the same time, your emotional reaction and your physiological reaction would be separate and independent. And according to ��𝗏𝗏 theory, emotional expression results from activation of the subcortical centers of the brain, and the optic thalamus in particular is a region that contains the neural organizations for different emotional expressions. An individual sensory organs take in an emotional stimulus, and then information about that stimulus is relayed to the cerebral cortex. It is in the cortex where such information is associated with conditioned processes, which in turn determine the direction of the response and stimulate the thalamic processes. The thalamus would then produce both an emotional response, that is feeling afraid, and a physiological response, that is racing heartbeat and sweating. Now we move on to another theory in emotion known as two-factor theory given by 𝗧𝗦𝗧. Prior to the development of 𝗧𝗦 and Singer's two-factor theory, two of the main theories of emotion were ��·Lange theory and ��𝗏𝗏 theory, where ��·Lange theory stated that emotions are the result of physiological responses in the body, while the ��𝗏𝗏 theory stated that physiological responses and emotional responses occur at the same time. Both the 𝗧𝗦-Singer and ��·Lange theories suggest that bodily responses are an integral part of our experience of an emotion. However, unlike ��·Lange theory and like the ��𝗏𝗏 theory, 𝗧𝗦-Singer theory states that different emotions can share similar patterns of physiological responses. According to 𝗧𝗦 and Singer, we look to our environment to try to figure out what is causing these physiological responses, and different emotions can result depending on the context. According to 𝗧𝗦-Singer theory of emotion, which is also known as two-factor theory, emotions are the result of the interaction between two factors. And what are these factors? One is physiological arousal and the other is cognition. According to 𝗧𝗦-Singer theory, physiological arousal is cognitively interpreted based on environmental context. This process culminates in emotional experience. Like the ��·Lange and ��𝗏𝗏 theories, 𝗧𝗦-Singer theory of emotion attempts to explain emotion as it relates to physiological arousal. According to this theory, emotion results from the interaction between two factors. More specifically, this theory claims that physiological arousal is cognitively interpreted within the context of each situation, which ultimately produces the emotional experience. These cognitive interpretations, how a person labels and understands what they are experiencing, are formed based on the person's past experiences. In a famous 1962 study, Stanley 𝗧𝗦 and Jerome Singer tested whether the same type of physiological activation receiving a shot of adrenaline could have different effects on people depending on the situational context. In the study, participants who were all male college students were given either a shot of epinephrine, which they were told was merely a vitamin injection, or a placebo injection. Some of the participants who received the epinephrine shot were informed of its effects like shaking, pounding heart or feeling flushed, and others were told that they would have no side effects, and some others were told incorrect information about its effects, like it would make them feel itchy or cause a headache. And the participants who knew what to expect from the epinephrine, they had a straightforward explanation for any effects they felt from the drug. However, 𝗧𝗧 and Singer believed that participants who were uninformed of epinephrine's effects or who were told incorrect information would look for something in their environment to explain why they were suddenly feeling different. After receiving the injection, participants were put into one of the two environments. In one version of the study that is designed to induce feelings of euphoria again state of being high, and the other one is the participants interacted with a confederate, someone who appears to be a real participant but is actually part of the research staff, who acted in a happy, joyful way. The confederate flew a paper airplane, crumpled up balls of paper to play a mock basketball game, made a slingshot out of rubber bands and played with a hula hoop. In the other version of the study, designed to induce feelings of anger, the participant and confederate were asked to fill out questionnaires which contained increasingly personal questions. The confederate became more and more irritated by the invasiveness of the questions and eventually tore up the questionnaire and stormed out. They found that injecting the drug did not lead participants to experience any given emotion. Contrary to the James Lange theory, therefore, which asserts that emotions arise from physiological arousal, this theory argued that bodily changes can support conscious emotional experiences but do not necessarily cause them. Rather, the interpretation of a certain emotion depends on both the individual's physiological state as well as their circumstances, a relationship mediated by cognitive processing. Appraisal theory of emotion given by Lazarus and Arnold. And this theory of emotion proposes that emotions are extracted from our appraisals, that is, our evaluations, interpretations and explanations of the events. These appraisals lead to different specific reactions in different people. Psychologist Magda Arnold made early advancements in appraisal theory, proposing that an initial appraisal begins the emotional sequence by arousing both the appropriate physiological reactions and the emotional experience itself. In 1991, psychologist Richard Lazarus built an appraisal theory to develop cognitive mediational theory, and this theory asserts that our emotions are determined by our appraisal of the stimulus, but it also suggests that immediate unconscious appraisals mediate between the stimulus and the emotional response. Lazarus also distinguished between primary appraisal, which seeks to establish the significance or meaning of an event, and secondary appraisal, which assesses the ability of the individual to cope with the sequences of the event. The appraisal theory of emotion was developed primarily through the work of prominent researchers Magda Arnold and Richard Lazarus, proposing that emotions are extracted from our appraisals. Appraisal is nothing but evaluation, interpretation and explanation of the event. The central question that the appraisal theory seeks to answer is why different people have different perceptions of and emotional reactions to the same situations. and psychologist Richard Lazarus adapted Arnold's work slightly in the development of his cognitive mediational theory, which asserts that our emotions are determined by our appraisals of stimuli, and this appraisal mediates between the stimulus and the emotional response, and it is immediate and often unconscious. In contrast to the 𝗧𝗦𝗔𝗧 theory of emotion, which views emotion as an outcome of the interaction between physiological arousal and cognition, Lazarus argued that appraisal precedes cognitive labeling simultaneously, and both the physiological arousal and the emotional experience itself. He also argued that cognitive activity involved in interpreting emotional context would be conscious or unconscious and may or may not take the form of conceptual processing. He stressed that the quality and intensity of emotions are controlled through cognitive processes which mediate the relationship between the person and the environment through coping strategies, which in turn are the basis of the emotional reaction. In his research, Lazarus specified two major types of appraisal methods. One, primary appraisal, which seeks to establish the significance or meaning of an event, and second, secondary appraisal, which assesses the ability of the individual to cope with the consequences of the event. In the specific context of emotion and stress, Lazarus described primary appraisals as judgments about the degree of potential harm or threat to well-being that a stressor might introduce. The perception of a threat then triggers the secondary appraisal, judgment of the options available to cope with the stressor, as well as the perceptions of how effective such options will be. And according to Lazarus, cognitive mediational theory, upon encountering a stressor, a person judges its potential threat, that is via primary appraisal, and then determines if effective options are available to manage the situation, that is via secondary appraisal. Stress is likely to result if a stressor is perceived as threatening and few or no effective options are available. Summary of the module: when we are faced with any situation, we either panic or our heart starts beating faster, or we tend to think immediately as to how to respond to the situation. The theories in emotions show us exactly through which means we respond, that's either physiologically or cognitively. Understanding the way we react can help us to manage our emotions in a better way.